I don't see, I see, let's see.
Alrighty.
I need to see attendees. There we go.
Alrighty, so we are live and ready on YouTube. So we're gonna get started. Welcome everybody to the next iteration of our History Committee series. We've been running these webinars. This is our second webinar now, I believe, that the History Committee is running. I am taking the place of Phil, our Executive Director tonight. My name is Jenna, I'm the Outreach Coordinator. A couple little housekeeping things. If you would like to participate in the chat, just make sure that you change the little bar if you're in the Zoom meeting. Just change the little bar that says all panelists to all panelists and attendees, and then you'll be able to talk to everybody and not just the five of us who are here as panelists. Without further ado, we are so excited to welcome Brad Schaefer to us this webinar today. I'm going to let the History Committee introduce Brad. So over to you, Clark.
Okay, thanks, Jan. With me also is Chris Beckett, who is not just a member of the History Committee, but also a skilled observer. Randall Rosenfeld is the RASC archivist and is the vice chair of the History Committee. My name is Clark Muir, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to Bradley E. Schaefer, our speaker. A quick biography. Bradley E. Schaefer is a distinguished professor and alumni professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at Louisiana State University. He earned his undergraduate and PhD degrees in physics, both from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He was a research astrophysicist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center and a professor at Yale University before joining LSU. As one of the discoverers of dark energy, Professor Schaefer received a share of the Gruber Cosmology Prize in 2007, as well as a share of the Breakthrough Prize in Fundamental Physics in 2015. Professor Schaefer has written numerous articles on the history of astronomy, including frequent pieces in Sky and Telescope. He is on the editorial boards of both Archaeoastronomy and the Journal for the History of Astronomy. And tonight's topic, the Star of Bethlehem, the new discoveries and solutions. Bradley?
Well, howdy. I'm trying to screen share here. Well, howdy again. I'm Brad, and I'm speaking to you from a much warmer climate than maybe many of you are. It's actually quite nice out there. I think it's in the 60s to wander on outside and take a look up at the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. This is quite an unusual Christmas season here. We have what many people could consider to be a good Star of Bethlehem, so to speak, with that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Well, it has been an unusual Christmas season, fair enough. And it is Christmas season, and that's what we're here to talk about. Probably the most ubiquitous or maybe important astronomical symbol we have, at least in Western culture, is the Star of Bethlehem. And over my shoulder, I have the Star of Bethlehem symbolized by a star up on top of our Christmas tree. That particular star is one that my wife has been in my wife's family ever since she was a kid, and I think before that. And it shows the dearness of the symbology of stars and the Star of Bethlehem for us, and its ubiquitousness also. So every year Christmas rolls around and people are asking the question, well, what is the Star of Bethlehem? And children are always asking or are being told that Christmas is commemorating the birth of Jesus Christ, and fair enough. And so children are always asking, well, when was Christ born? And the question of when Christ was born, there we go. The question of when Christ was born also feeds into the question of what is the Star of Bethlehem. So let me start off by telling the traditional answer for when Christ was born. The traditional answer, and this is what I was taught as a kid, and probably most people are taught as kids, is that Christ was born in the year 1 BC, or maybe you call it 0, or maybe it was 1 AD. It's never very clear there. And that he was born on December 25th, which is why we're celebrating Christmas, well, in a few days. Fair enough. That's the traditional answer. But you know, of all the many answers that have been put out there, this is kind of the one that we really know can't be right, or must be wrong in all its particulars. Okay, let's look at them in a row here. Well, 1 BC for the birth date. Well, the original reason why that 1 BC was put around was because a later historian, centuries later in Rome, tried to extrapolate back, and he picked a year and the date of Caesar Augustus, and he came up with what we now would call 1 BC. Fair enough. But Dio Cassius had no idea what was going on, or certainly not to the accuracy that you have. But we know that 1 BC cannot be the birth year of Christ, because we know that Jesus was born when King Herod of Judea was still alive. And we know very well when Herod died. We know this from Josephus. We know it from a variety of other records. Herod died in March of 4 BC. So Jesus was born before March of 4 BC. And so, well, there you go. 1 BC is not a starter. Okay, there we go. Well, what about December? Traditionally, we have December, but it can't be, because we're told in Luke that there were shepherds in the field at night. And that only happens in the springtime when lambing occurs. And it'd be pretty cold out there in Judea in the middle of the night in December. So we know it was not December. Okay. Well, what about the 25th of the month? Well, we have no real evidence that it was the actual date was the 25th of any month, be it a December or a springtime month. But we do know why the date, the 25th of the day of the month, was selected. And it was selected by the early church fathers, basically randomly, because what they were trying to do is they were trying to co-opt a pagan celebration for the solstice. That would be the Saturnalia. And it was a typical thing they frequently would do of trying to adopt places to put churches, trying to adopt rituals from earlier pagans to try and have the pagans buy into this new religion. Fine. And so it turns out back at that time, the Saturnalia happened, well, the solstice happened on the 25th day of December with the usual calendrical jittering around. So so Christmas got enshrined as being the 25th day of December, whereas the 25th day of December is just basically a carryover from the early church fathers trying to co-opt a Roman solstice celebration. So all told, the traditional answer is wrong in every aspect. We still tell the kids that. Okay. But we still have the question of when was Christ born? And we can go treating this question as a scholarly question. And when I say we have to go treating it as a scholarly question, that is highlighting that this isn't going to have anything to do with anyone's faith. There aren't going to be any serious theological implications of trying to answer when was Christ born. This is more of a question for scholars trying to work out the chronology of the New Testament. Okay, fair enough. It has to be done. And the fact that that I'll be addressing here in this talk, I'll be addressing a scholarly question, can serve to hide an important truth. And that is that, well, why do we care when Christ was born? Well, it's because of Christmas. And what we're celebrating in Christmas really doesn't matter exactly what day we go celebrating it in. What matters is, well, the spirit of Christmas and the memory of why we're doing this celebration. So with that little bit of a caveat there, we have to realize that this whole question of what is the Star of Bethlehem and when was Christ born, That's a scholarly question, which is kind of hiding away from the importance of what's going on with Christmas. Nevertheless, this scholarly question is frequently asked. Astronomers are always being roped into giving an opinion, and many have. So as a scholarly question, you have to go asking yourself, well, what is the evidence we have? Well, it turns out we don't have very much evidence, and I basically listed here, at least at a higher level, all the evidence that we do have. The first point you get from reading the Bible is that Jesus was born during the reign of Caesar Augustus, the greatest Roman emperor. And we know this from Luke, for example, that the taxation, there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus. So Jesus was born when Caesar Augustus was emperor. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't help very much. Caesar Augustus had a very long and good reign from 27 BC to 14 AD, and we already knew that Jesus was born in that time interval. So this bit of information, very specific evidence, is actually fairly uncertain. Fine. We're also told that Mary and Joseph went back to Bethlehem due to a census or a taxing that was made by Cyrenius. He's a real historic personage. He was the governor of Syria from 6 AD to 12 AD. We actually know quite a lot about his life. We know for certain when he was there. We don't have any particular records of a taxation during that time, but you have this thing that Cyrenius was governor of Syria from 6 AD to 12 AD, and so if you have the taxation and the census coming out while Cyrenius was around, you have a time interval which we'll describe later, can't be right. And so this has always left biblical scholars and astronomers with the question of, what do you make of this little bit of information? Apologists of many brands have tried to come up with explanations. None of them are even vaguely satisfying or have any real likelihood or plausibility. And so what's happened is people tend to ignore this little bit of evidence. They say, oh, something went wrong. There you go. So we have a bit of contradictory evidence here regarding the census of Cyrenius. Well, the third bit of evidence we have is that we're told that Jesus was, well, roughly 30 to 40 years old at the time of the crucifixion. So you can take the time of the crucifixion and count backwards 30 or 40 years. Well, the date of the crucifixion is not terribly well known. Virtually everyone comes up with a crucifixion date either in the year 30 AD or 33 AD. Fair enough. But we don't know the length of Jesus's ministry to add into these age estimates. So there's substantial uncertainties. In the Bible, we hear, well, it's in Luke, and Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age. This is in the middle of Jesus's ministry. Well, about 30 years of age. Well, that could be anything from 25 to 35, or maybe even 21 to 39, something like that. So we have an approximate age, at least. We also hear from John that, again, during the ministry, someone in a crowd comes out and says, thou art, Jesus, thou art not yet 50 years old. Now, you aren't 50 years old. You don't say that to a 25-year-old, okay? You'd say it maybe to someone in their 40s. Well, this is all kind of wishy-washy here. Crudely, with not large confidence, Jesus was 30 to 40 years old at the time of the crucifixion, and counting backward from 30 or 33 AD, well, we get sometime, roughly in the first decade BC. Okay, so this jives well, but hardly has the exactitude or confidence that you'd use to actually date the birth very closely. Okay. The fourth bit of item I've already mentioned, and that was, we know the date of the death of King Herod. It was in March of the year 4 BC. And we know this from an astronomical thing, among other reasons. We were told by Josephus that Herod died just before a particular lunar eclipse. and that was the one that happened in 4 BC. So we know, and we know this from other sources too. So we know that Herod died in March of 4 BC, and so Christ was born before then. Well, we also remember that Herod went off and had the massacre of the infants up to 2 years old. Okay, and so and this happened soon before his death. So what this means is that Jesus would have been born sometime on the roughly 2 years before his death, maybe 3 years, maybe 1 year, something in there. And so with Herod dying in 4 BC, we're pointing to, well, not only before March 4 BC for the birth, but also it points a little more closely to, well, maybe in 5 BC or 6 BC or 7 BC or something like that. We also still have the information that it had to have been in the springtime because there were shepherds in the field. Okay, so here we're dealing. We've got it probably not with the most highest confidence, but probably Jesus is born springtime in 5 BC, 6 BC, or 7 BC, maybe 8 BC, or something in that ballpark. Fair enough. Okay. The last bit of information we have is that Jesus was born presumably at the time of the Star of Bethlehem. Okay, and we all know about the Star of Bethlehem. So we don't know much about the Star of Bethlehem actually, because we have this from only the Bible. We don't have any other information, none at all. So let me just read off the relevant passages from Matthew. And so the Bible tells us that the Magi are saying, for we have seen his star in the east. Then Herod inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. He hadn't seen it. Lo, the star which they saw, the Magi saw in the east, went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. They worshipped presumably they worshipped at the foot of the Christ child, and then an angel told them to depart back to their home by going by a different route. Okay, fair enough. That's probably even correct. Or, well, that's part of the question at hand. Now, what is the Star of Bethlehem? We don't have much information there. Nothing in this thing, well, we don't know. Okay, and so since the earliest days, the question of what is the Star of Bethlehem has filled a lot of, well, speculation. There are kind of 4 different groups or categories of possible explanations that people have come up with. Fair enough. One possibility is that the Star of Bethlehem, it's a miracle. Simple as that. Something beyond physics, something that the Lord went up and put up in the sky that has nothing to do with astronomy or anything else. It's beyond physics. It's a miracle. And this would be as a fulfillment of prophecy. Now, my expectation, although I do not have surveys to support this, my expectation is that this is the general class of solutions which many lay Christians adopt. Okay. And well, you know, up until the 1600s, this was the solution, a miracle, was the solution everyone adopted because they didn't have any other answers floating around. Okay, so one class of Star of Bethlehem solutions is simply that it's a miracle. And you kind of can't prove or disprove that idea. Okay, I know, there you go. Theologians and many others don't like the miracle idea simply because you can't make predictions. It's not satisfying for many different grounds, because if you have to invoke miracles, then you can do anything you want. Okay, but it still could be a miracle. Yeah, what the heck? The second class of solutions for the Star of Bethlehem is that it's a pious fable. It's something that was made up by later-day people expressing their faith, their piety, but it's made up nonetheless. So a pious tale has no relationship to historical reality. Okay, And we know that the Star of Bethlehem story attracts many such pious tales. For example, it's attracted the name and the story and the number of the Magi. There's no biblical basis for that. That's just made up. There you go. And we also have the pious tale about the young drummer boy who is there at the Nativity. So these are pious tales, and this is the sort of thing that happens all the time in religious for religious events. And actually, I was kind of surprised. So I've talked with a lot of theologians about this, Christian theologians of many different brands. And this pious tale explanation for the Star of Bethlehem is actually the one that they all uniformly all favored. So the theologians are telling me that the Star of Bethlehem is likely just simply a pious tale. Now, of course, people who are biblical literalists will not agree with this, but there you go. A third general class of Star of Bethlehem solutions is that the Star of Bethlehem is an astrological symbol, not an astronomical, but an astrological symbol. And this makes some good sense because, after all, the Magi were Persian astrologers, in part at least. And so they would be looking up in the sky for astrological symbols. They could have interpreted something that was to them an astrological symbol. They could have interpreted this as being the Star of Bethlehem, and that would have motivated them to go to take the very long trek over to Jerusalem. Okay, now this astrological symbol idea largely has been, well, actually not largely, it's been completely ignored by scholars other than a couple one sentences, oh yeah, and this is astrological, blah, 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 which it wasn't. It was still simple astronomical. And there's a reason why the scholars of all stripes have completely ignored this third category of solutions. It's because astrology is bad philosophically for so many reasons, and it also has no predictive power. However, astrology holds the hearts of many people. And so scholars of many different brands have been battling for the hearts of the public over astrology. And this has given astrology an incredibly bad scent. And so scholars of many types have tended to avoid controversies by completely ignoring astrology. You don't want to be seen as a historian or an astronomer who's studying astrology. Now, this all changed back in 1999 when Michael Molnar came out with his book with an astrological symbol interpretation for the Star of Bethlehem. And I'll be getting to that more later here. Okay, fair enough. The fourth class of Star of Bethlehem possibilities is astronomical. That is, the idea is that the Star of Bethlehem was claimed to be some real astronomical event up in the sky, something you could actually sit down and everyone would look at and say, oh, wow, my gosh, that's clearly the sign of the birth of the Messiah. Okay. And so most of these proposed explanations, and there are many of them, most of the proposed explanations are in some version or another something spectacular that you see up in the sky, something that, at least to a modern astronomer, would appear wonderful. And then you go from feeling wonderful to saying, the people back in the olden times would have thought that this is wonderful enough to indicate the birth of the Messiah. Now, the astronomical class of solutions for the Star of Bethlehem is by far and away the most commonly one talked about, because scholars can actually go back and there are things you can do. Astronomers are very good at calculating what the sky was like way back in ancient times. We can calculate the positions of comets. We can calculate the positions of the planets. We can calculate, we know when meteor showers occur. We can use old Chinese records or whatever to tell us about transient events. So we actually have a pretty good knowledge of what the sky was like back in the year, in the first decade before well, in the first decade BC. And so because of this, you have people can actually talk about this, and you can come up with many different proposed ideas. And so this is why when you go to a planetarium show, this is the only thing that people talk about, this fourth class. And so your typical planetarium show mentions a number of these possibilities illustrated on the dome above them. And then typically they come down and say, oh, it was likely one or the other. And every planetarium show differs as to what it was. So, but the point is that astronomical event one is the most likely or the most popular class of solutions for what the Star of Bethlehem actually was. Okay, now of the astronomical events, the most popular one is that the Star of Bethlehem was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, just like what we have out there now. Hey, I saw this claim that the Star of Bethlehem was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. I saw it today in a big article in the New York Times. Okay, so this is clearly one of the more common popular ideas. You could always see it, and it's always can be illustrated by cranking a planetarium back to the year 7 BC. Now, the real original Jupiter-Saturn conjunction idea is not quite what most people would know. The idea was actually proposed first by the great astronomer Johannes Kepler in the year 1604. And what happened with it back in 1604, getting towards October, Jupiter was passing Saturn for a single conjunction. Jupiter does this every 20 years, so it's not that big of a deal. But Jupiter passed Saturn, and just as Jupiter was passing Saturn near its closest, right next to it, the great supernova of 1604 erupted. And it got up bright enough to be seen in the daytime and was even compared historically to the supernova of 1604. It was compared historically compared to the brightness of the moon. Holy cow! You can just see Kepler seeing, he doesn't know what's going on. He sees Jupiter, Saturn coming together, and all of a sudden this big, huge, bright new guest star appears. Wow. So he postulated that a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction will spawn what we now know as a supernova. Okay. Now, Kepler was the first person who had a good enough tables, the Rudolphine tables, to calculate the position of the planets with pretty good accuracy. And so he had worked backwards the planetary positions back to the time of the birth of Jesus. And he noticed that in the year 7 BC, that there was not only one conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, but with the retrograde loops, it was actually a triple conjunction. And so he thought that if a single Jupiter-Saturn conjunction can create a star that got as bright as the moon, that a triple conjunction would have created an even greater star, and that star would be spectacular enough to be the Star of Bethlehem. That would be an appropriate sign for the birth of the Messiah. Well, as many of you are aware, tonight we have a close conjunction, or it's getting closer over the next couple nights. Jupiter and Saturn are right in the middle of one of their close conjunctions. It's going to be a single conjunction. And coming up on, tonight, the RASC had a virtual star party. And we could see from telescopic views, Jupiter and Saturn real close to each other. It's kind of awesome. This is something that the astronomers don't see very frequently. Okay, now coming up on Monday, the Jupiter and Saturn will be 1/10 of a degree apart, which if you have poor eyesight, the two are going to merge. For ordinary eyesight, you'll be able to clearly see that the two stars are still there. I'm kind of hoping it'll happen again, but boy, wouldn't it be cool if coming up on Monday night, somewhere over there near Jupiter and Saturn, we had a nearby galactic supernova. Not too near, mind you, but boy, that would things hitting fans if that happened again. Anyway, so this basic idea is that a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction creates the star, and that's what happened in the year 7 BC, okay? So it would be the supernova, which would be the Star of Bethlehem, and merely the conjunction, which made the Star of Bethlehem. Okay, that's the idea. Now, there are a variety of troubles with this for the idea of putting it into, well, really thinking that this is actually the Star of Bethlehem. One is simply we now know that supernovae have absolutely nothing to do with where Jupiter and Saturn appear in Earth's sky. So the physics of that is still out. But historically, you have to ask what the people of the time would have thought. And we actually know quite a lot about the old astrology, which is what this would be. We know a lot about the old astrology. For example, Ptolemy had this exhaustive book, the Tetrabiblos, from soon after the Gospel writers' time. And we have books by Firmicus beforehand. And so we actually know a lot exhaustively about what astrologers of the time thought. And so we know that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction had no meaning to the old astrologers. It didn't mean the birth of anybody. It didn't point to a king. It didn't point to a very great king. It didn't point to Judea. It didn't point to anything. If an astrologer saw this, they'd say, "Yeah, that's pretty. Well, okay." And then simply go back to looking at their horoscopes, because that's what astrologers do. They look at horoscopes. They wouldn't have looked up to see that Jupiter and Saturn were there. Well, they could have, in principle, could have seen it on their horoscope as things passing by, but they had no interpretation for it. So the idea that the Star of Bethlehem is this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is just a non-starter. It would have been meaningless to the Magi, the only people for which this would actually have mattered. Well, there are many other astronomical answers, and here's something I pulled up just from the first ones I thought of. And they stretch from 12 BC with Halley's Comet to 2 BC with actually a rather awesome Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, where they actually merged to the point where, at least if you're far south, it was an actual occultation. Incredibly rare, very visible, involving very bright stars. A modern astronomer would say, this has to be spectacular. This could be an omen for the birth of the Messiah. But you know, we actually have an embarrassment of riches. We have too many different possibilities as to what this astronomical answer could be. We have no way of deciding between these many possibilities. And so that means that the likelihood of any one of them is pretty low, unusably low. So if there's no way to pick out which of these many astronomical answers is right, well, you can have no confidence in any of them, okay? People try, they always say, oh, but Halley's Comet was so bright, blah, 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 blah. But no, you can't do that. You have so many answers that you have, well, too many answers. You don't know which one is right. And you can't distinguish between the two. Okay, now, what I've just told you now is largely a talk that I gave at the Vatican itself. It was for a conference, fair enough. And what I told them at the time was basically this astronomical thing that I've told you here, that there are so many possibilities, there's no way to distinguish between them, and so there's no way to have any confidence in enough answers. So I have this old Vatican talk, and I am now embarrassed by my Vatican talk, and I'll tell you why in a moment or two. Okay. Well, let's go back and look at some of these astronomical answers. The trouble is, most of the astronomical answers have strong refutations. Refutations is with capital R, as much as you can do in these old sort of historical questions. For example, Halley's Comet in 12 BC, or the supposed, or the Chinese comet of 4 BC. These have variously are popular for being pointed to as being Halley's Comet, fair enough, for being the Star of Bethlehem, fair enough. But comets, it can't possibly be a comet. me and many other people have done censuses of omens throughout the world in many different regions. And what we find is that comets, well, and eclipses are universally feared. These are the most scary omens in the sky. The coming of a comet is always the death of a king, the falling of the nation, the end of the earth. It's always that. Every culture everywhere always has it. Comets and eclipses are the evilest omens up in the sky. And so if you're trying to look for an omen that marks the birth of the Messiah, you would not use a comet, okay? So comets aren't there. They don't fit into the old Magi's astrology, and they're exactly opposite in symbolism of what you need. Well, a couple more down, you have kind of a weird case. Back in 1999, a guy named Mark Kidger came out with a book claiming that the Star of Bethlehem was an old nova called Do Aquili, okay, fair enough, which got brightened up to pretty faint back in the year 1925. And he hypothesized, on no evidence, that Do Aquili was actually a recurrent nova, and that this was then the time when it happened around 6 BC, that was the Star of Bethlehem. Now, I was kind of horrified and humor and laughing at the same time when this book came out, because I happen to be the world's leading expert on Do Aquili. In my astrophysics life, I study nova and recurrent nova very heavily, and I'm the only person alive who's done anything on Do Aquili. Actually, Alan Schaefer, he did a very good job. But I know very confidently that Do Aquili could not possibly have been a recurrent nova. It's on a recurrence time scale. It was probably 1 million years ago, not 2,000 years ago. Okay, also, nova always peak to the same brightness, and back in 1925, Do Aquili peaked at a magnitude of 8.5 magnitudes, if I remember right. And so if it had recurred, well, it didn't, but if it had recurred back in the year 6 BC, it would have also gotten up to a peak magnitude of 8.5, and no one would ever know about it. So this is kind of showing you the refutations you can get for a claim for Do Aquili, which was and still is very popular, with whole books out about it. Okay, let me hop down to another one of these, and that is the Venus-Jupiter occultation. That actually would have been spectacular, and it did occur, but it's not the Star of Bethlehem, because it happened in the year 2 BC, and Herod died 2 years before, and Jesus was born before that. So this is not the Star of Bethlehem. There you go. Okay, but there's still people who are coming around and roundly claiming, and so on. You have to be careful here, because, for example, people can get rather wrapped up and be, well, maybe I should say, unscholarly. For example, back at that Vatican conference where I presented the astronomical possibilities, the next speaker was someone, a local, a very pious local, I'm sure, who was absolutely sure that the Star of Bethlehem was Halley's Comet. And it was kind of horrifying. There I was sitting in the front row, and this guy was up there, and some people in the audience were randomly questioning him, and he got very worked up, and there was even foam flying from his mouth. I was there in the front row. What do I do? My gosh. So you have to be careful on the Star of Bethlehem things, because very devout people, let's put it this way, very devout people can hold strong opinions and will not be swayed. And so that's just the trouble that comes with the game here. But the overarching conclusion here is that the astronomical answers have very strong specific refutations. They're all wrong, okay? Let me give you a general refutation, which covers all of these here, all of these possibilities. The general refutation is that all of these astronomical spectaculars are meaningless to the Magi. Again, the Magi are Persian astrologers. It's more complicated than that, but they're Persian astrologers, and we know what their astrology was, and none of these meant anything to them. You could not place a comet onto a horoscope. Their astrology of the time had said nothing about a Venus-Jupiter occultation or a Saturn-Jupiter occultation or conjunction. These are all non-starters because they are meaningless to Magi. They are meaningless to astrologers. And this is a very general refutation for all of the astronomical answers. So they're all wrong. All of the things that you hear about in the New York Times today, in the December planetarium shows, they're all wrong. Everything I said in the Vatican is all wrong too. What can I say? Okay, now at this point, let me come back and tell you about Molnar's new solution. Well, you know, about twice a year, I get any of a wide variety of, let's call it, fringe books sent to me. Okay. Heck, one even was hand delivered to my home on Christmas morning. Boy, that was awkward. So this season, I've only had one Star of Bethlehem paper to review, and it was junk. Okay, I can't tell you who it was for reviewer confidentiality, but it was junk. Holy cow. And so I get these books a lot of the times, and I've been getting these books for decades. And you get kind of blasé about these various claims. And so I was incredibly shocked when I got, well, if you can see me in the window, I got this book. This is the book by Michael Molnar. It was published in 1999. The title, The Star of Bethlehem. They're all titled The Star of Bethlehem. Fair enough. And Molnar actually was making sense. And he was convincing. Blah! So what happened is I was on vacation and actually started reading the whole bloody thing all the way through, and I was really convinced. Molnar's right. And so while on vacation, I immediately emailed to Clive Ruggles, who's arguably the world's greatest, maybe historian of astronomy, but certainly the world's greatest archaeoastronomer, and told him excitedly about this new idea. You know, I only had 10 sentences to sketch out Molnar's idea and the points behind it. And Ruggles came back with a short, the usual British terse email saying something to the effect, quote, blindingly obvious in retrospect. Ooh. So what he's saying is that, holy cow, Molnar is right. But the in retrospect points out that we only realize this now that Molnar has made the point. Or another way of saying is, we all should have realized Molnar was right long ago, and we didn't. And boy, dang, he pulled a fast one on all of this. We should have gotten at this. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about Molnar. I've actually only met him for about 2 minutes once. It was very short in passing at a conference. Okay, we said hello and kept on going. We had to go to places. Molnar is a professor at Rutgers University, and he's been studying history of astronomy for quite a long time. And his particular speciality is astrology. He has grabbed the bull by the horns and is actually treating astrology as a real scholarly topic. Now, we as amateur astronomers and we as professional astronomers, I'm both, have always avoided astrology or been pugnacious about astrology. That's why we've never really thought about this. But Molnar has been embracing it. So starting about the year, I think it was 1990, maybe it was 91, Molnar started publishing papers in journals working out the entire astrology of various kings and emperors and such around the eastern half of the Mediterranean. So, for example, he's looked and worked out what was really going on with the horoscope of Caesar Augustus himself. It's actually quite an interesting little story there. But he was working his way, and there were just article after article as he was doing various great kings around the Eastern Mediterranean. And so it was by 1999 that he got to looking at the question of the astrology of Jesus Christ, okay? And that was then producing, well, this book, okay? So Molnar is the world's expert in working out the astrology in ancient classical times. Okay, fine. And so he's the one who knows most of what's going on. So maybe Clive and I can be forgiven for not having thought of all the things ourselves, because for many of the points, you actually had to be an astrologer. You had to know what the astrology was back at that time. There are few people in the world that know it, or certainly anywhere near as good as Molnar. Okay, so let me go and describe for you what is in Molnar's book. And I have broken up Molnar's book into 3 points. Here's Molnar's first point. Molnar's first point, well, I'll just read it. All of the astronomical ideas must be wrong, since they are of zero interest to the Magi. Well, that's just what I was talking about earlier. And I knew to talk about it earlier only because I knew what Molnar had been telling us. So Molnar is basically coming back and saying, the emperor has no clothing. Everyone, planetarians, me and the Vatican, have been going off and spouting these astronomical ideas as being great. But they can't be right. The Magi would have no interest. They would have no ability to interpret these happenings. All the astronomical ideas are wrong. They're just wrong, okay? And all of a sudden, with Molnar's first point, you know, all of this overburden that we've been hearing about in magazines and planetarium shows goes away. Okay, so we still, Molnar still hasn't told us what the Star of Bethlehem is, but he's come back and said all the rest of those ideas, all the published ideas, they're just wrong. They aren't even starters. And dang it, Molnar's right. And this particular point is something that Clive Ruggles and I should have realized. You know, it's kind of a sin for historians to try to ascribe our modern wants back onto our archaic people. And here we were doing just that. We were looking for modern astronomical spectaculars, something that would excite an astronomer, amateur or professional. But that's irrelevant. So Molnar is right. All of the astronomical ideas must be wrong. Molnar's second point, once you've cleared away all that clutter, Molnar has the obvious answer. Well, what would be a possible solution? What would a magi, an astrologer, look at that could tell you the birth of a very great king in Judea? And what a magi would look at is a horoscope. You know, we've all seen them. This is a modern version of Molnar's horoscope, fair enough. And so this is what a magi would be looking at. Now, a horoscope goes out and doesn't tell you all that much. It tells you the date of the birth for when you cast a horoscope for. It tells you the country of the birth. It only tells you the country. The astrology at the time would only pinpoint it down to the nearest country, for example, Judea or Syria or what have you. And a horoscope can also tell you the properties, the characteristic of the child. For example, the birth of a very great king, okay? So the horoscopes can't go beyond that. They can tell you the date, the country, and the quality of the child. You know, let's think back about it a little bit. What did the Magi know in the Bible? They knew to go to Judea. They knew the date. They knew when to go. And they knew that it would be the birth of a very great king. So the three things that the Magi knew, the date, the country, and the quality of the child, that's all they knew. And that's all that a horoscope will tell you. So that right there is kind of telling you that the astrological answer has a lot going for it. You know, there's another thing going for it, and that is the traditional business about seeing the Magi seeing the star in the east. Okay. Now it turns out that the phrase en Anatole, seeing the star in the east, is an astrological technical term and was used twice in the nativity story. Holy cow, an astrological technical term being used twice in the nativity story. Whoa. So this is another rather, it's not quite a smoking gun, but it's really telling us that the star has an astrological component, which it probably dominates. Okay. And you know, once you start saying that once you start having this astrological answer, that the Star of Bethlehem is a particular horoscope, then all of a sudden you can start answering a wide variety, or at least several questions, which have always plagued the astronomical ideas. For example, the astronomy people have never been able to answer why you see the star in the east and then you go west. How's that leading anyone anywhere? Well, okay. So that's always been a trouble. Astronomy answers just don't hack it. But however, if you have an astrological answer, then all of a sudden it becomes clear. You see, the term in the east is a technical astrological term, which means in modern terminology, the heliacal rising. The heliacal rising is when the stars first appear in the morning sky as the sun moves through the sky. They appear in the morning sky for briefly as they're rising higher and higher in the dawn sky. And that is the heliacal rising. And that's always seen in the east, hence the etymology of the technical term in the east, in Anatolia. So astrologically, the horoscope can tell you only the country of birth, and the horoscope very clearly indicates Judea, which happened to be the west. So maybe the meaning of, well, the modern translate or the usual translation of seeing the star in the east and then they traveled to the west, the real meaning of it is they saw the heliacal rise and they went to Judea. No trouble. Wow, we have a simple solution. When you go to astrology, you solve that problem. Another problem with the astronomical answers is, why did the Magi go to Jerusalem first? Why not go directly to Bethlehem? Well, there's no good answer astronomically, but there's a very good answer astrologically. That is, the old astrology can only specify the country or the province. And the horoscope I'm going to show you in a moment or two is pointing to Judea. So all they could do is know the birth was somewhere in Judea. So they clearly went to the capital of Judea and asked around. What else would you do? For example, if I told you that some great event is going to be happening in Colorado, what would you do? And you wanted to visit it, and all you know is it's going to happen in Colorado on such and such a date, you'd fly into Denver and ask around. Well, that's what the Magi did. They went to the capital, Jerusalem, and asked around. So the astrological answers are simple and clear. It answers another question here of, why did no one in Jerusalem see the star? The Bible tells us that. And it's a hard one to answer for many of the astronomical spectaculars. It's not like the Jews of the time missed Halley's Comet, or they missed the Jupiter Venus conjunction. And everyone would have seen these conjunctions between Jupiter and Saturn moving back and forth. But no one in Jerusalem saw the star. We're told that. Okay. So astronomers have always had a hard time answering this. Why didn't they see this big bright supernova? Well, they had no answer. But if you go from an astrology point of view, there's an easy, necessary answer. See, the Jews at the time were not into astrology. They had no way of knowing what would indicate the birth of a very great king in Judea on a horoscope, okay? And even if they did, you don't look up to it and see it, because in astrology, you have things where planets are fairly close to the sun and invisible. That actually happens in the case here for most of the planets. And you have things involving trines in the sky where planets are integral multiples, including 0, integral multiples of 120 degrees apart on the ecliptic. People like ordinary people who aren't astrologers look up in the sky. They aren't going to say, well, Martha, come on out here. Jupiter's 120 degrees from, that's not going to happen. So, of course, no one in Jerusalem saw the star because it was an astrological star. It was a horoscope. You had to look down onto the horoscope, not up into the sky. And the Jews at the time did not do that. So the astrological answer all of a sudden is answering all these things that this astronomical ideas could not solve. Okay, so Molnar's second point was that the Star of Bethlehem was a horoscope. This is a configuration of planets put onto, a sheet of paper, and you plot them out, and then you interpret this by the laws of astrology, and you come up with a deduction about the birth of a very great king in Judea. So Molnar's point 2 is that the Star of Bethlehem is a horoscope, okay? Now, the way I'm breaking it down, Molnar has a third point. And the third point is he actually identifies the day, the only day on which you have the perfect horoscope. It's for 17 April, 6 BC. Molnar, and now other people, have searched quite widely in dates, and having a powerful horoscope like this is very rare. It's hard to quantify exactly how rare because there are multiple indications, and you could have a less powerful horoscope, which might still have sent the Magi traveling to Jerusalem, and those might be more frequent. So it's hard to get an exact thing. But me and other people have come up with estimates. Oh, maybe a horoscope this powerful might happen once every millennium or some such number. The point is not that it's one per millennium. The point is it's very rare. And it was powerful enough to have the horoscope send the Magi to try to worship at the feet of the Christ child. Okay. So Molnar has the perfect horoscope, and it's unique. It's the only one that happened. And there's another big advantage here. This horoscope is for a date, which is in the springtime. The lambs can be in the field. Many of the other astronomical ideas weren't working in the spring. But this one is in the springtime. There you go. And the year of it is 6 BC. That's about 2 years, a little less than 2 years before the death of King Herod. So what you have here is, we'd already, and many people had already realized that given the date of Herod and the murder of innocents up to 2 years old, that Christ had to have been born in springtime of 5 BC or 6 BC or 7 BC or something like that. And this is perfect. 6 BC, springtime. And Molnar's horoscope came to this without any fudging or anything like that. It just pops out. So Molnar's horoscope comes out with the, perfect time of springtime of 6 BC. Okay, well, let's take a look at this horoscope. Again, this is a copy of what I'm holding up here in my hand, fine. The horoscope, here is the horoscope for 17 April 6 BC. This is done, inscribed in a more modern version for showing horoscopes. And it has a variety of features which scream out to ancient astrologers for the birth of a very great king in Judea. For example, you have Jupiter is heliacal rise, at its heliacal rise. That is when it's very powerful and indicates the birth of a king, okay? And Jupiter is the king star, and a heliacal rise is like a birth. So kings are born when you have Jupiter at heliacal rise. And we know that this is an important feature because there are several ancient writers which are pointing explicitly to this point. And it so happens that Jupiter happened to have on that day a close conjunction with the thin crescent moon. When it had this conjunction with the thin crescent moon, it turns out from the astrology of the day that enhanced the importance. This is pointing not only to the birth of a king, but this is pointing to the birth of a great king. Now, you also happen to have both, holy cow, both the sun and Venus at their exaltation points. Out of the whole zodiac, 360 degrees, each planet has 1 degree in which they are exalted. When they are uber important, when they're all powerful, both the sun and Venus were at their exaltation points on that day. And both the sun and Venus are very beneficent planets. This means good, great things are going to happen. So you have Jupiter at heliacal rise with the moon in close conjunction, and you have the sun and Venus at exaltation. Holy cow, hard to get better than that, but you can get better than that because you have the sun, Jupiter, and Saturn are all in trine with each other. And you have both Jupiter and Saturn in attendance before the sun. And so from the astrology at the time, that just makes things even more powerful, okay? So you have, this horoscope is indicating the birth of a very great king, a very, very great king. But how do you get the Judea part? Well, each one of the zodiacal constellations is identified with a particular country or a province for the astrology of the time. Over the centuries, the particular identification of the zodiacal constellations with countries changes over time. But for the time of importance, the zodiacal constellation of Aries is identified with Judea. And you can see that all of the important things are happening in Aries. This is a very clear pointing to Judea in the old astrology. So what you have here, this horoscope is pointing to the birth of a very great king in Judea. Well, presumably for 17 April 6 BC. That's the Star of Bethlehem. Right here on your screen, that horoscope is a Star of Bethlehem. Now, I gotta say, coming out, well, it's not what you'd think before coming in. And I hate to say, I have never put a horoscope up on my Christmas tree in the back. There are symbolisms and there are symbolisms, and humanity is always very traditional on such sorts of things. So I'll probably die, live through the rest of my life with my wife's family star up on top of the Christmas tree, and I'm probably not going to go putting this up. Nevertheless, the horoscope is a Star of Bethlehem. Everything fits wonderfully, beautifully, awesomely, and everything else just doesn't work. Well, I suppose you could always go out and claim, oh, it's a miracle. But then what it would really be, you'd have to say it's a miracle that the Lord had all the planets aligning just perfectly. Or if you say it's not this, then you'd have to have the Lord as being a rather maleficent being to try to fool us this way. So a miracle explanation is not even very good. So what you have here is we have a very confident answer, as confident as you can be in these sort of historical studies. So let me read it out loud just to be sure that there's no confusion. So we have a very confident answer that Molnar has correctly identified the Star of Bethlehem as being a horoscope for 17 April, 6 BC, and the horoscope predicts the birth of a very great king in Judea. Wow, okay. A real confident answer. You know, all the rest of the solutions are wrong, and this one has everything going for it. So we can really be very confident in this. Now, for the confidence here, okay, Clive Ruggles, for example, when I emailed him very soon after the book came out, rolled over and said, oh my gosh, we should have thought of this all along. And large numbers of other scholars are doing the same thing. And I've been watching as the theologians and numismatists and lexicographers and astronomers and many scholars of many type are just rolling over and say, holy cow, it's obvious now that Molnar has pointed it out. Yeah, Molnar's got to be right. So indeed, back in the year 2014, there was a large conference called in the Groningen in the Netherlands, International Star of Bethlehem Conference. And the stated point of this conference was to let Molnar's solution be known to a large number of top-level scholars. And yeah, there you go. Basically, the Molnar's solution has won over most scholarly researchers. Now, it's the difference than having won over the pastor or priest or imam, because what's going on here is the scholars are realizing, holy cow, the argument's kind of as airtight as you can get in historical questions. But that sort of information doesn't get down to the lay people. Okay, so you know, I grew up with the story of the Star of Bethlehem, usually as a miracle or as some astronomical event, and people for issues like that, people there's huge social inertia. People aren't going to change what they were taught as a child. And I was taught as a child this, so I've used intellectual arguments to change, but most people aren't going to have encountered this. And so most people are probably going to go to the grave thinking about the Star of Bethlehem, that which is what they were taught when they were young. Fair enough. And so converting over lay people is going to be a generational issue. You have to wait for the old fogies to die off. That's not well stated, I apologize, but there we go. Well, people like me, I got to die off here. Fair enough. So the lay people have not gotten this message. We actually do have a real and confident solution to the Star of Bethlehem. Now, there's a problem with Molnar's solution. And it's not a problem that you would think of. And it's not a problem with his solution. It's a problem with the implications for his solution. Molnar has only discovered the origin of the star as stated by the gospel writer around 80 or 90 AD, something like that. Molnar's solution does not include the historicity or the veracity of any other aspect of the nativity story. And it's important to realize this. Molnar is only telling us what the Star of Bethlehem is or what it originated as. He's not telling us whether there were magi. He's not telling us whether the magi worshipped and they did this, that, and the other thing. He's not telling us that. He's only telling us about the origin of the star as reported by the gospel writer. Okay? And that's an important one, because what it's saying is that many of the higher level questions that we have relating to the star are not answered by Molnar's solution. Okay? And so you have the question of whether the Magi really did behave. They went to Jerusalem. They saw the star, went to Jerusalem, went to Bethlehem, worshiped the feet of the Christ child, and then went home by a different way. That might well be possible. Within Molnar's solution, that's perfectly good. Presumably at that point, someone, so that biblical literalist interpretation is perfectly valid. It coexists nicely and merrily with Molnar's discovery of what the star actually is. But you know, the Magi might have come late or early. So that still works perfectly well within Molnar's solution. Molnar is telling us what the star originated as, not what the Magi did. And at the other extreme, I've put up here a spectrum of a variety of ideas, and you can take these pointers and move them around to put them to match your own predilections. So for example, concerning what the Magi were or did, you can take this pointer and do it all the way to the left to the point and say, well, the Magi did not exist. If you have outside reasons or biases for thinking the Magi did not exist, well, that's perfectly fine. Within Molnar's solution, he has no need for having the Magi to exist. The origin of the star can easily come from any of a variety of ways where the knowledge of the star got to the gospel writer or was invented by someone in 80 AD and then told to the gospel writer as a pious tale. So maybe the Magi are a completely pious tale, or maybe the biblical literalists are right and the Magi really did exist and traveled as is described in the Bible. It doesn't matter. Molnar's solution fits them all. And so, for example, Molnar's solution does not tell you whether the Christ was divine or whether Christ was a prophet, as claimed by Islamic people, or whether Christ even existed at all, okay? I'm sure some atheists will be out there making such claims like that. So Molnar's solution for the origin of the star hasn't told us anything about the highest level question of Christ's divinity. So anyone, atheists or Islamic people or Christians of every faith, are perfectly happy with this Molnar solution. All Molnar is telling us is the origin of the star. So let me give you two extremes of how this can work. We can take the biblical literalist idea that the star appeared in the sky as a horoscope and was seen by the Magi, and that motivated them to go on a trip to Jerusalem, to Bethlehem, worship at the feet of the divine Christ child, and then go home. And so it's perfectly fine. Molnar's idea fits perfectly with biblical literalism. Now, we can take that pointer and scrunch it all the way over to the left if you're so inclined, and you can have the origin of the star being by a Greek convert to Christianity, maybe around the year 80 AD. Well, the Greeks of the time were notorious for going out and seeking celestial omens for births of very great kings. So it'd been very natural for a Greek of the time to cast back a horoscope, because the Greeks were into horoscopes, to cast back a horoscope to 6 BC, recognize the star of Bethlehem using the current astrology of the time that we know, and then making up this story about the Magi. So maybe no one at the time of the Christ's birth knew about this star, and no one transmitted it on later somehow to the gospel writer. Maybe it was just a made-up thing from some Greek convert casting astrology around 80 AD or some such time. But you know, in that case, the origin of the star is still the horoscope. So in all of these possible solutions that are amenable to everyone of every faith and religion, in all of those solutions, the Star of Bethlehem still originated as a horoscope for 17 April 6 BC. So why didn't I stop there?
That was amazing, Brad. We've got a few questions.
Not amazing for me. This is all Michael Molnar. Holy cow! The guy's right. He had all the insights.
Yeah. Clark, do you want me to start reading a couple of these?
Yeah, go ahead. There's 3 or 4 questions, and I posted if you want to add one. Just go to the Q&A button and ask away. Go ahead.
So the first one is from Joanne. She asks, has anyone disputed Molnar's solution?
Well, not amongst scholars. For scholars, what happened at Groningen is they were disputing old points. For example, a number of people got up and pointed out how the correlation between the zodiacal sign and the country changed over time. It changed actually quite a lot from 1500 B or 1300 BC until the Middle Ages, and they're quite right. However, what's relevant is not what the people in Renaissance Europe thought. What's relevant is what people in the Near East thought around the birth of Christ, or at least around the birth of the gospel writer. And we know exactly what those correlations are. So people are laying questions on that, and they just haven't realized that those are irrelevant questions because we already know the answers. Other people are using, they take up the stories that they had as a kid, or for example, you have at the Groningen conference, you had a blatant, flagrant, flaming atheist get up and decry everything and anything in the Bible as having any veracity at all. And at some level, I don't know, there you go. So what you're seeing here is there are knee-jerk reactions by people on the street or theologians who say, well, that's not what I grew up and that doesn't fit my theology. But yeah, it actually does fit their theology. So at that level, sure, there are controversies because Molnar is saying the emperor has no clothing, and well, there you go. And we remember from the fairy tale with the emperor's clothing that there are people who didn't quite agree with it immediately. So there's huge social inertia, and it's operating here too.
Thank you. So Peter Broughton has made a comment and then asked a question. Thanks for an illuminating presentation. Peter and I share a sense of humor. What do you make of the Serenus and Quirinius census date?
It depends on how much of a biblical literalist you are. If you're a biblical literalist, you'd say that is certainly word for word correct, as you must. And so they invent claims that Cyrenius had this unknown governorship back at a time when we knew perfectly well he was nowhere near Judea. We know historically, but they they somehow cram him in, and he had a quick tax, and then he went back to where he came from. You can always do that. So if you're a biblical literalist, you're forced into that. What the theologians tell me, and this is from a wide variety of stripes of Christianity, the Christian theologians come back and say is, well, that is some sort of a historical mix-up. They were trying to remember, someone was trying to remember that Cyrenius had a tax then, and that provided an excuse for Mary and Joseph to go to Bethlehem. And so it was just the usual sort of historical mix-up, which is very common, of course, in all old historical literature. So that's what most people would say if you aren't a biblical literalist.
Thank you so much. Edward asked the question, you said that lay people, and we have, I think, 7 or 8 or 5 more questions left after this one. you said that lay people do not know about Molnar's solution and may not even care. But what about Christian church leaders? Are they aware of Molnar? And if they are, should they be teaching their communities this information?
They are very well aware. One of the oldest friends of, actually independently, both of my wife and myself, is now the director of the Vatican Observatory. And he basically has gone over to the Molnar solution also. So yes, church leaders are well aware.
Thank you. And Teresa asks, what would prompt them to cast this horoscope in the first place? Like what would prompt them to do this?
That I don't have a good answer for. Molnar does not have a good answer for. We can speculate that they were just trolling around. Maybe they were casting horoscopes day by day, and come 17 April, they said, "Whoa, whoa, holy cow!" And then they quickly hopped on a camel, and 3 months later, they worshipped at the feet of the divine Christ child, who was then 3 months old. Or maybe he was 12 months old. Who knows?
I like that question, because I was thinking it might be that maybe they were doing this continuously, and then they had some hits, they had some misses. Yeah.
No idea.
Yeah. Okay. Steve Holmes from KW Center, he asks, or states and then asks, Matt 2-9 and the star that they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. Can you add anything to this narrative?
Yeah, so Molnar is pointing out that this is basically Jupiter going ahead of them, and Jupiter going from heliacal rising up to its stationary point, where in astrological terms, it's stationary. And so that is what he thinks that particular few words refers to.
Barry asked the question, are the papers from the, and I'm going to say this wrong, Groningen conference?
Something like that.
Yeah, okay. Are these papers published anywhere? Are they available online? I feel like
I don't know about online, because as a contributor, I got actually 2 copies of the book for free.
Oh wow!
Or as part of my conference registration fee. So yes, there is a book on this. It's titled "The Star of Bethlehem." They all start that way. "The Star of Bethlehem and the Magi," and the editors are Peter Barthel, Barthel, and George Van Kooten. So yes, you can get this book. I don't know whether you can go getting it from Amazon. You can get anything from Amazon. So it's probably you can get it from Amazon.
Sorry, and who's the publisher?
The Magi.
Who's the publisher?
Brill, Brill.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. All right, got a question from Randall Peterman. On the horoscope, if the sections of the outer ring represent different countries, then it looked like the various planet star events were adjacent to 2 countries, not one. How did Molnar choose Judea as the only relevant country?
Yeah, because the important planets are the ones that are in Aries.
Okay.
And so it's Aries, the zodiacal sign, which is attributed to be Judea. And it's clear that all the important things are in Aries.
You know, I didn't know, and it shows you what I know. I know nothing about horoscopes. I've never been a follower. And,
exactly.
And so
you're an astronomer.
I was really interested to learn in your presentation that horoscopes are cast based on location on the Earth. You know, it seems like there's a connection there to like city and place and stuff like that.
You didn't phrase it quite correctly.
Okay.
It is cast for the place on Earth, but only to be able to locate where the ascendant was, which is more of a time of day as opposed to a location on Earth question.
Okay.
The location on Earth is merely the identification of each of the 12 zodiacal constellations with a country or province. So it wasn't cast in Judea or cast for Judea. It's more that the horoscope points to Judea as being the important point.
Okay. I see. Okay. Yeah. Interesting nonetheless. So again, I know nothing So good stuff. All right.
That's why Molnar was able to see what no one else had seen, because he had treated astrology seriously.
Yeah.
People like you and me have not treated astrology seriously. We ignore it as best we can. But if you're a historian of astronomy, astrology then suddenly is important. Doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong, good or bad philosophy. It is important historically, and you can't or shouldn't go ignoring it. And that's what Molnar was doing. He was not ignoring it.
Thank you. And Judy Black, I think Judy's in Halifax, or in Nova Scotia anyway. She asks, Mulder reevaluated the date of Christ's birth. Has anyone questioned / determined the date or time of his death as being different than we acknowledged?
There you start getting into work that I do. So it turns out the date of the crucifixion is an astronomical question. Let me tell you the phrase, or let me tell you the rubric that we can get from evidence. We know that it happened during the reign of Pontius Pilate. We know historically that was 26 to 36 or something like that AD. Fair enough. We know it happened on a Friday that happened to be either the 14th or the 15th of the lunar month of Nisan. Okay. Now, actually, the most contentious point there, and I still am getting large amounts of mail from people that claim that Good Friday was not the day of the crucifixion, that Jesus was actually crucified on a Good Wednesday. And their California cult comes back and says it happened on a Good Thursday. Who'd have thought? Actually, these other people have sound biblical bases for knowing it's not Friday. Who'd have thought? But you have the astronomical question of within that one decade, find a date on which the 14th or the 15th of the Jewish lunar month of Nisan happens to fall on a Friday or a Thursday or a Wednesday, depending on what you believe. And so we actually have good, clear answers to that. But it's an astronomical question. And I'll tell you why why it's deeper than just simply understanding calendars. It's an astronomical question because knowing the 14th or the 15th of a Jewish lunar month of Nisan, well, those are lunar months. And so if you're trying to find out which days are the 14th or the 15th, you have to know when the first day of the lunar month is. And that depends on the thin crescent visibility. And that is a hard problem. People have been working on this problem, well, including the Islamic astronomers, for more than a millennium, about a millennium and a half. And only recently has it got to the point where modern astronomers actually can make good, accurate, useful models of the lunar crescent visibility. And so I actually spent 1 man-year of my life working out those models. So I have, by far and away, the best understanding, the best listing published of when the days of one Nisan are. And you can then work out when the 14th or the 15th of the Jewish lunar month of Nisan is, and then see which ones are Fridays or Wednesdays. And you can then work out possible candidate dates. So we actually do know, got to be careful here. Yeah, so actually, as an astronomical answer, we do have a good definitive answer to that schematic problem as I stated it. Okay? And maybe I shouldn't tell you what the answer is. It's published in a variety of places. I won't tell you what the answer is. And so maybe I'll have to come back for a Good Friday talk.
Good, that'd be awesome. All right. Thanks for answering that. Thanks for the question, Judy. Appreciate that. And this is our last one. If I've missed any, please just chime in now. Have you, and this is from Merrill, have you or anyone else been refining the research on this topic? If so, what can you tell us? And then they say, you must know this. It's Merrill Hess. Tell Martha hello, please.
Merrill, hey, how's it going?
Do you want to, maybe you can unmute them there, Jenna. I think Jenna has the power to unmute.
Yeah, I'll bring, if you'd like, I can bring
Hey, Merrill.
Merrill to talk.
Yeah, why don't we do that? That'd be nice.
All right, Merrill, you can now unmute yourself if you would like to speak.
Hello, Brad. Good to see you.
Hello, Merrill. Hey, say hello, everyone, back at the old club.
I surely will. I surely will. We're getting ready to meet at the Burbank Soccer Complex on Monday night for the public.
Got to be done. That can be done well, social distancing.
Yes.
And that's a good location for low down like that. Yes, wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hey, so your question is, what about advances on this? Mm-hmm. And I don't know of any advances that can be done. And there have not been any advances that I've at least heard about. But I'm not sure what more can be done, because Molnar has already combed and knows all of the old-time astrological literature. And we know the planet positions already very accurately. So there's not much more one can do. So I don't think there have been any advances, and I don't know how you could advance on what Molnar already has.
Good enough.
All right, thanks so much, Merrill. All right, we have a few questions. Let's see. There's a lot of people that have said how much they really enjoyed the talk this evening. I certainly have. This was, if somebody told me I was going to sit through more than 5 minutes of a astrological talk, I would have told them that was never going to happen. But that proved me wrong tonight. All right, let's see. So if astrology uses planets in reality, then there is an astronomical connection. Does Molnar horoscope imply that the planets were really in their sky at the time and not just visible because it is a daytime phenomena?
Well, what Molnar is saying is basically what you see on the horoscope there, that that's the position of the planets. They really, really were there. We know that from modern calculations. That's what Molnar used to plot this horoscope, fair enough. Some of those planets were definitely not visible. Jupiter and the moon and Saturn were definitely visible. But you'd have to look early in the morning sky. After all, it's the day of heliacal rising of Jupiter, so you'd have to look, kind of know where to look, and you'd only have a couple minutes to be able to spot Jupiter. Yeah. So they really are up in the sky, but it's not like they're going to be visible to anyone in any practical way. So the only way to know where the planets are is by looking on at calculated positions of the planets, which is a horoscope.
So I actually, and that was from Rick, by the way. So based on that, so I'm a visual observer, but I was just wondering, so at the present time, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know that much about the whole astrology, astronomical connection, but from my understanding is things have sort of shifted like a constellation or so because of precession and such. But at this time, would the planets and the astrological and actual constellations have lined up more accurately? So for example, now, like, I think if somebody is born on such and such a date in the horoscopes, they might say, well, they're a Sagittarian, but the sun was actually in Scorpius or something like that. But were things more closely aligned at this time?
Well, you have to be careful here. The stars were more closely aligned, but that's not what was relevant to the old Greek descended, Mesopotamian descended horoscopes. So you have this old question that because of precession, the stars are shifting. And you have a variety of loose ends that were that are not well described for an astronomer's point of view to the old astrology. For example, I was born when the sun was in the constellation of Ophiuchus. I'm an Ophiuchian.
So am I.
There we go. Happy birthday.
Yeah, so you were born sometime in the past 3 years.
But all of this doesn't mean anything to an astrologer.
Right.
I remember back in my youth, back when I was in high school, I was a bigwig with the local junior astronomical society. I had the great idea of inviting for a talk, inviting a real professional astrologer who then gave their spiel and had a horribly negative audience on them. I guess I was an impolite host, but by not trying to rein them in. But you know, high school, you get clear bunk up there what you do. But the argument that I am an Ophiuchian, the sun was in the constellation of Ophiuchus when I was born, or if you were in Scorpio and the sun was near to the star Antares, I think that means you would actually be a Libran, or is it a Sagittarian? I never keep them straight, which is part of the point. But those sort of arguments make no headway with the real, or at least Western astrologers, because what you have is they say that the meaning of the zodiacal signs are tied to the constellation coordinate grid. They are not tied to the stars. And they are not tied to an individual constellation, which some are narrow, some are wide. They're tied to these uniform segments in the sky, where the sky is divided up into 12ths. And so they claim that. And so all my arguments back when I was a kid about, well, I'm an Ophiuchian, and oh, gee, your constellations are one off, don't mean anything to them. They just shrug it off. Another way of looking at this, which they'll shrug off too, is to point out that the Indian or Hindu horoscopes, which derive from the same Greek tradition, have adopted the opposite answer. They tie the meaning of a horoscope to the stars. The Hindu astrology accounts for precession. So, you know, you can't argue to either side. Oh, you're wrong. Well, it's clearly tied to the stars, or it's clearly tied to the coordinate grid. Well, that doesn't really affect the astrology true believers. Mm-hmm. But you know, there is a little bit of a thing that should affect the astrology true believers by coming out and saying, you know, how can you both be right? Well, you can't. So who's right? Who's wrong? What do you give that for the confidence of your being right? Well, it's got to be a 50-50. Okay. Mm-hmm. But also those sort of arguments against astrologers make no headway. And so that's only for, those sort of arguments are only for when you're preaching to the choir and astronomers are gabbing among themselves and trying to get a laugh out of the poor astrologers.
Yeah. It's sort of hard to get my head around it. I don't work in astronomy, but I work in another field of science, and just like sort of focusing something that's not sort of based in an observable reality is a challenge. Okay, we got a question from Graham. Are you aware of any other astrology horoscope milestone discoveries?
There are a variety of questions which historians worry about, but nothing that I know of that would make it into, well, the New York Times, as this is done, or other such things. As a historian, I've long been wondering about the astrological omens that are associated with Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar. And here's a typical mystery. You have Augustus telling us, we know that we know the date and time that he was born. We know the time within a couple minutes. We have Augustus highlighting on his coinage and many other places that his sign was Capricorn. You know, the sun was far away from Capricorn at the time. So how could Caesar Augustus call his sign to be Capricorn? Well, Molnar came up with the answer to this. He actually knows what's going on. Molnar's answer is that Caesar Augustus's sign was taken not as the sun sign, but as a sign in which the lot of fortune resided, which was Capricorn. And I bet you never heard of the lot of fortune. Very few people have. It's an arcane construction that you would get by looking on these horoscopes. It has to do, you want to go in one direction by an equal angle between the sun and the moon, and you go that same angle that farther down, and that's where your lot of fortune is. So Augustus's sign of Capricorn was not a sun sign, it was for the lot of fortune. Who would have thought? Here's another one that's kind of weird. You know, Caesar Augustus tells us, I think it was in his autobiography, that back before the death of Julius Caesar, he and Agrippa were just, you know, high schoolers, and they had been sent over to Illyria, Albania, and they had gone in to see an astrologer named Theogenes. And the story is told by Augustus goes, Agrippa passed along his date of birth, Theogenes calculated and predicted very great things for Agrippa. Fine. And Theogenes then asked for the birth information for Augustus. And after hemming and hawing, Augustus finally gave it over. Theogenes went and calculated and came back, and Theogenes fell on his knees and started bowing to the great king who was to come. Boy, you know, if in Roman politics, having a story like that, probably even true, is a kawow. But that's not even the worst of it, or the best of it, I guess you'd call it. It also so happens, we know, that Caesar Augustus's father was a senator in the Roman Senate. When his wife gave birth, this delayed him from getting to the Senate. When he arrived, one of the other senators, Figulus, who was an astrologer, asked him for the time of the birth of Caesar Augustus. And Augustus's father told him that it was a few minutes before sunrise. Whereupon Figulus immediately came out and said, "You have given birth to a great king who will rule over all of us." You know, it might even be true. But if you're talking about signs and omens that heralded the startling and rapid rise of Augustus soon after Caesar's assassination, it's hard to beat an astrological omen where in the Senate, someone takes your time of birth and says, "This son shall rule over us all." And then you have the Theogenes taking the date and time of Augustus's birth and bowing to Augustus as a great king. Now that's got to have been worthy of a lot of propaganda, at least, in the Roman civil wars that happened. Clearly, Caesar Augustus played a very canny and smart Roman politics game, but having these astrological omens really have got to have helped.
Excellent. two more questions. And thanks to Jenna, by the way. I was reading out of the Q&A. There were some questions over in the chat, so we've gone back and forth here. We're now on the last two questions. I looked into the occultation of Jupiter by the moon, and it happened at about 1 in the afternoon in Bethlehem. And Roger Pape asked, would they have observed it?
No. And the Magi would not have observed. The Magi are astrologers. They don't look up. Come on. They would have seen it on their horoscope. And their horoscope has no information about the ecliptic latitude of Jupiter and the moon. They would have not have been able to distinguish whether it was an occultation or a conjunction. And it didn't matter because that's not in their that's not in their astrology. So in practice, actually the answer is no, the people in Jerusalem or the Magi over in Persia or something like that would not have been able to see this Jupiter-Moon conjunction, which was occultations at some places. They would not have seen it, and they weren't even looking up, so it doesn't matter.
Okay. Judy sent a link for some explanation. In Wikipedia, there's some explanations of some of the astrological symbols if people are looking for them. Grant,
I just got notification from my computer that I have a low battery. So I will get up and walk into my study and plug this in here. So we can keep on going, but that's what's happening in my background. So what was the question?
All right, I'll just give you a moment here, and I'll just mark this one as complete, and then we'll move along here to the next one.
And just while you adjust, I shared that link in the chat if anyone's interested.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jenna. Appreciate that. So yeah, we've got several volunteers here tonight. Many hands certainly make for light work, so it's really nice. Yeah. Jenna, I think this is one of our best attended presentations.
Yeah, we've had up to sort of around 110, 115 people here all night, and they stayed for the whole. There's 77 left of you who are staying till the very, very end, and I'm impressed with you. Yeah.
that definitely is a high number for these presentations. So thank you. All right. So Grant asks, last question. To me, the elephant in the room is the question: did the astrology predict the birth of Christ, or was it a coincidence?
I don't know. Once again, Molnar's point is only about the origin of the star story as given in the gospel. Whether there was anyone noticing this horoscope or not, we don't know. Whether this horoscope actually predicted the birth of the Messiah, well, maybe. I don't know.
Well, that was wonderful. I'm going to hand it over to Clark. I think Clark's going to have some closing remarks. Thank you so much. I loved it.
Yeah, it was a great pleasure. I do have a more of a thought and a question, but it's more about the field of archaeoastronomy in general. And to me, it sometimes feels like a field of landmines rather than because you start digging around. Now, you mentioned Clive Ruggles, and I seem to recall he wrote something, and of course he's British and would, in the Stonehenge being the famous one, there's hundreds of stone circles all over Britain. And he sort of commented, if I recall, paraphrasing, that going to these stone circles and finding astronomical coincidences or lineups is like celestial butterfly collecting.
Dime a dozen.
Yeah.
If you can't, if you go to a stone circle and you can't find some pair of stones pointing to something astronomical on the horizon, it just means you don't have imagination or you haven't looked. Stone circles have alignments on anything and everything, and it's completely meaningless. You have to get away from only looking at a site plan. And that was actually a lot of what Clive Ruggles had done. He's done some really awesome work on the megalithic monuments in the British Isles. Incredibly good, very rigorous, quite good. And there just are alignments everywhere, but they weren't intentional.
Now, Brad,
However,
I've heard the best alignments point to the pubs.
Oh, what?
The best alignments apparently point to the local pubs.
Maybe. After all, if you have a stone circle with 10 or 20 stones in it, you can always find a pair of those stones that points to any pub. Or another example, actually, this is a bit of Canadian. I was looking at Canadian medicine wheels, and I took one Canadian medicine wheel and used the various points in it to find that the ancient Indians in the plains had constructed their medicine wheels to point quite accurately to all of the winning NFL teams of the year. I said that wrong. Excuse me. I first tried the winningest NFL teams of the year. That was a complete washout. Then I tried the losingest NFL teams of the year, and that's where I got the good match.
So in other words, New York. But
no, I think I did this back in the 1970s. You know, youthful exuberance.
Sure. But to go further, we also you talk about how it's going to take a generation to get people to learn about what you were talking about tonight as being fact. But we know with the internet, and we know there's other examples. For example, in the Chaco Canyon, for example, it's seems to be widely believed that it was pointing to, it's a sketch of the supernova remnant. But there's so much material like that out there. It feels like it's going to take a long time to get on the right track here. And I think what you've described here tonight, and what Clive Ruggles was talking about just picking the astronomical alignments, that you don't get the big picture and you're not learning anything.
Yeah, Clive actually was remarkably good at this. One of the things he did as a way of using the site plans, you know, these old megalithic monuments, we don't have any ethnographic information and nothing useful in the way of archaeological information. But what he did was he was able to take many sites of similar construction, the same provenance, you know, time and area, and prove they were astronomical. It's kind of awesome. I'll tell you briefly what he did. There are a series of stone circles in Argyll, which consist of, well, they're called recumbent stone circles, where one of the stones is laid down. And what Clive found, with an incredibly extensive, exhausting measurements with theodolites and all the huge survey work, he found that if you stand in the center of these recumbent stone circles, that the horizon arc covered by the recumbent stone is always a part of the horizon which is incredibly distant. Whereas if you look in other directions variously, the horizon can be quite near and quite high. And this is far past statistics. You know, this is not random chance. And so what it means, and Clive, and it's proven, you know, it's again, what as good as you can prove any of these things, that the builders of these recumbent stone circles were interested in horizon visibility. That is a proof they were built with the intended purpose of being using for horizon visibility. Another thing that he's done for these and other places, Michael Hoskins has done quite a lot on this all around Europe and Mediterranean and many places. They've found that for megaliths of many types, tombs, dolmens, hunebedden, tholuses, many types of these things, they all are always tightly constrained in terms of arc on the horizon that they point to. Let me give an example. If you look around Navajo hogans. We're told that the Navajo tell us that they build the hogan such that the door points towards the direction of sunrise on the day which you build the hogan, or you start building the hogan. Okay, fair enough. So if an archaeologist came back and dug up a lot of hogans, a millennium or 10 millennium from now, they would find that all of these hogans are pointing to a fairly restricted angle on the horizon, within roughly 30 degrees of exactly east. That's actually what you find. Now, when you start looking around at, well, actually Christian cathedrals too, when you start looking around at these megalithic monuments throughout Europe, you find that within a small area, within a given time frame, that they also point to a fairly small arc on the horizon. And the small arc on the horizon varies from place to place. I think there's a place, a part of northern Portugal where they have alignments very similar to the Navajo hogans. So presumably they aligned their tholoses to point to sunrise on a particular day or something like that. If you go looking at graves in Crete, they point off in a different direction. If you go looking at tombs in Holland, they point off in yet another different arc. Now, this is showing how culture moves around within Europe, fair enough, but it also proves that the people at the time were interested in the orientation. The only way you can go getting all those tombs and monoliths and megaliths pointing in the same direction is astronomical. The only motivation you can think of by having things pointing in the same direction over a very wide area can only be astronomical. So here, Clive and other people have come up with proofs that the megalithic circle builders were interested in horizon visibility and that they were pointing to astronomical directions. There you go. That's archaeoastronomy. They've proven it.
Okay, Randall, do you have anything else? We're pushing 2 hours, so it's probably a good idea to close up.
No, the only thing I've got left to say is thank you, Brad.
Oh, we should thank Molnar, wherever he is.
I think he's off building violins, actually.
Oh, okay.
Actually, if you check his site, that's what he really wanted to do in retirement, and apparently it's what he has done.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, thanks, Bradley, for doing this. It's been a thrill, and we're delighted that you took the opportunity.
Maybe I could close with, actually, I just thought of this here. Maybe I could close with 2 exhortations or recommendations or suggestions. People should not worry too much about this scholarly question, but should take to heart the meaning of the holidays. That's what's important. And for astronomers, we should take from this, you should go outside and look up. The Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is beautiful. And that's a good meaning to take from this.
Okay, well, thanks very much for those closing words. We've been doing this once a month, and we're not sure what our next month topic will be, but we'll try to set the word out when we find out. Thanks, Jenna, for handling the tech end of this. It makes it, we didn't have any glitches, a battery malfunction maybe, but that's it. And thanks, Chris and Randall, as always, for your technical and expertise and keeping an eye on the questions. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jenna to say goodnight.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone who put this together. Thank you so much, Brad, for being here. The feedback in the chat has been nothing but positive, and many folks are saying that you've covered the topic extremely well and have provided a really wonderful balanced viewpoint. So thank you so much for that. And I will also add that your friends your friends were here. Not just Meryl, but Michelle and John Fry were also here. And they said, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. We sure do miss you, love you, admire you, and shower you with celestial hugs and kisses.
I'll have my wife do that.
So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to send out just a link in the chat right now. If you're interested in hearing about the next time that the History Committee is hosting one of these webinars, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter where we advertise our events, and you will be able to see it there. Again, thank you so much, everybody, for making this night possible. Dr. Schaefer, I learned so much. Thank you so much for all of your time and your expertise. And for all of the attendees, the 53 of you who stayed to the very, very end, well done. And to the rest of you who've joined through YouTube and through Zoom, thank you so much for being here. Clear skies, everybody, and we will see you the next time. Oh, I will do one last quick plug. If you want to join RASC on a much less academic talk, so I'm not sure if it'll be your style, but we do have one going on the 21st where we're partnering with Explore Scientific. So if you would like to follow Explore Scientific on social media, we will be live streaming with them on the 21st. Okay, that's it. Clear skies, everybody. Enjoy the conjunction.